Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2026 Waste Management Phoenix Open Initial Research Show. Yeah, I hope you had a whole lot better farmers than I did. It was not a very good showing for yours truly. I hope you played all of the Justin Rose. I hope you had the Justin Rose outright. Hope you played a lot of Siwoo Kim and Pearson Cootie and avoided the strong suggestions that I had for you, like the Will Zalatoris, the Ludwigs, all of that. Like I said, it was just not a very good showing for yours truly at the Farmers. So I'm going to try and pick myself up off the dirt because it was really, really bad for yours truly. And we move to probably the most fun event on the PGA Tour, at least in the early portion of the calendar, the greenest show on grass, the Waste Management Phoenix Open. So let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight and moving forward are from both Fantasy National and the Rabbit Hole over at BetSperts. I am going to slowly start using more and more of the Rabbit Hole and therefore less and less of Fantasy National. As I mentioned last week, I've been in pretty close contact with Ron Kloss, or Close, I believe, is the way you pronounce his last name. He's been very, very helpful in helping a data-driven mind like mine understand what the Rabbit Hole is presenting, where all of the data that I want to look at can be found, all of those. So I'm really, really thankful for his help. So moving forward, I'm going to start slowly using less and less of Fantasy National. So bear with me as I get more and more comfortable with the Rabbit Hole. But tonight and for the foreseeable future, data is provided by both Fantasy National and the Rabbit Hole. In terms of social media, my handle is in the description. I post research every Monday regarding some tournament info, patterns of previous winners, players in the field for that week who also fit those patterns. I try to do something every Monday for the tournament of that week, so I'll try to have something out tomorrow for TPC Scottsdale and the Waste Management Phoenix Open. So if you want to see the weekly research that I do on the PGA Tour, give me a follow at your preferred social media site. X is also where I place my weekly betting cards and top player usage in the DFS contests I play. That comes out every Wednesday after the DFS Tactics show. So if you want to see the players that I'm wagering with my own money and players I'm using most often in my lineups, go give me a follow over at X. Lastly, for social media, Gabe's handle's in the description. He writes a great article called The Fringe. Can't recommend it enough. Would not recommend it if I did not believe in it. There's a reason why I've worked with him now for a few years. Really enjoyed it. I've probably given him a pretty good lead after my disaster showing at the Farmers. But his regular article comes out on Sunday. It's a great way to prepare for the week. And then by subscribing to his article, you're going to get his deluxe version, which comes out early on Wednesdays, has his top plays and values, projected ownerships, and all of that. So make sure you are subscribed to that article. Don't miss out. And follow him over on social media, because that is where we put our detailed write-ups for the Picks Challenge. And we encourage you all to play along with us over on his social media page or in the comments here of the show. We would greatly welcome everyone's opinions if you want to play along with us every week. So make sure you're doing that at one of those two places. Make sure you're following him over on social media and showing him some support. Lastly, for this intro, we are live. Chat's open. I want to hear from you all. How was your Farmers? Was it successful? Was it a disaster like mine? And then moving forward for the Waste Management, how big of a favorite is Scotty in your mind? Not if he is the favorite, but is it basically Scotty times a billion? And then everybody else, who do you think is the best chance to dethrone Scotty, perhaps? What do you know of the course? What do you think of the tournament in general? Put your thoughts and opinions into the chat. If you're not able to catch a show live, put your thoughts and opinions into the comments. I'll always get to those as well. So let's get into it. Let's do our initial research for the 2026 Waste Management Phoenix Open. And we are going to start, as we always do on a Sunday evening, over at the GCSAA Tournament Fact Sheet. We are in Scottsdale, Arizona. at TPC Scottsdale. Technically, the stadium, of course, there is another course on property, but TPC the stadium is the main course and the only course that'll be used this week for the Waste Management Phoenix Open. TPC Scottsdale was originally designed by Jay Morrish and Tom Weiskopf, and then Tom Weiskopf came through in 2014 and made a few renovations to the course, update it for the modern game and things like that. There's not been a whole lot of changes to the course from last year to this year, with the exception of this first note here. There's a slight modification to the number 11 tee to accommodate the stadium for the 16th, the famous par 3 party that is the 16th at TPC Scottsdale. TPC Scottsdale is I would say, average length. I'm actually going to go to the rabbit hole very quickly. They call it average length. It's right on the verge of being short, considering it's a par 71. But we'll say average length, par 71, traditional par 71, in the sense that we have 4 par 3s and 3 par 5s, measuring just over 7,250 at 7,261 yards. The greens, we have seen this before at the American Express. These are Poa Trivialis with rye overseed. Yes, there is a little bit of some bent as part of it as well, but we're looking at Poa Trivialis greens, and those are very, very common throughout the beginning portions of the PGA Tour calendar. Grabbing my notes here, we're going to be looking at places like Harbor Town, Innisbrook, the Copperhead course, which is the Valspar, Memorial Park, which is Houston, Quail Hollow, PGA West Stadium course, TPC Sawgrass, the Players, also has this Poa Trivialis, TPC San Antonio. So lots of places, especially early on in the calendar, have this Poa Trivialis and rye overseed. So this is a surface that we have a lot of data for. We should feel very comfortable on who putts well here. So it'll be fairly important to keep in mind moving forward throughout the week. And we are on rye and kind of a fine fescue overseed throughout the rest of the course. The greens here at TPC Scottsdale, pretty darn large at 7,070 square feet, essentially. Just over 7,000 square feet. That is very large. The average is right around 6,000 square feet on the PGA Tour, maybe a little less. I'm just rounding there. So these are pretty darn large greens. A pretty small amount of fairway, but they are fairly wide. Pretty darn forgiving fairways here at TPC Scottsdale. A decent amount of rough. Only 3 holes with water, or there's only 3 water hazards, but they come into play on 6 holes. They circle, or they make use of the ponds and the lake very, very well. With 17, the drivable par 4 17th, the little pond there that comes into play by the green to the left. And then before the church pew bunkers, there is technically water on that hole. Water quite a bit on the back 9 in the par 5 before the stadium hole. So a little bit of water trouble around TPC Scottsdale. And yeah, that's kind of a look at the waste management. The course hasn't gone through a whole lot of change over the years, other than this, pretty big renovation in 2014. They've had a lot of rainfall, but it should be pretty up to snuff for the tournament. So there's a look at TPC Scottsdale from a GCSAA tournament fact sheet standpoint. Again, a Tom Weiskopf coupled with Jay Morrish design, renovated by Tom Weiskopf now 11 or 12 years ago. A traditional par 71, an average to maybe slightly short traditional par 71, 4 par 3s, 3 par 5s, Poa Trivialis greens, pretty darn large Poa Trivialis greens. Generally run pretty pure, a little bit fast, at least per Fantasy National. The rabbit hole has 12.5 stimp labeled as average. I'll tell you now, Fantasy National would label that as fast. So there's a little bit of some of the differences between the two analytics sites, just to give you a heads up there. Like I said, large greens, quite a few holes with water in play, and pretty wide forgiving fairways at 38 yards. So there's a look at the GCSA tournament fact sheet. We'll close that out. That is the player page view here in the rabbit hole, and we've got a pretty darn good loaded field for the Waste Management, headlined by, of course, Scotty Scheffler, who won the Amex a couple weeks ago. Siwoo Kim, who's been on fire, played very well at the Farmers, has played just very well in 2026 with a top 15 at the Sony, top 10 at the American Express, top 5 at the Farmers. I mean, he's just been playing very, very well lately. Jacob Bridgman's playing well. Chris Goddard, who won the Sony, Harry Hall, Sahith Theegala, who's had a tremendous start to 2026. If we sort by just the player names here, again, I'm just going to go in alphabetical order here. Just a pretty darn good field, if I say so myself. Akshay Bhatia, and coming like Chris Kirk, Colin Morikawa, Corey Connors. Let's see, Harris English is, I believe, a former winner quite a few years ago. Harry Hall, Hideki, JJ Spawn. Again, Jacob Bridgman, who's played well early in 2026. Jordan Spieth. Kurt Kitayama, Matt Fitzpatrick, Mav McNeely, Max Homa. Thorbjornsen's playing this week again. Minwoo Lee. Your defending champion is not eligible to play, who went to live. The defending champion is Thomas Dietrich. Rasmus Højgaard here. Sahith, Sam Burns, Scotty, Substraka, Tom Kim, Tony Finau, Wyndham Clark. Big names here this week at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. I've got that sorted just for the beginning of 2026. That's why there's so few rounds here. But before we uncover that, let's take a look at what the rabbit hole has to say about TPC Scottsdale and the Waste Management Phoenix Open. It is obviously a desert and a TPC course type. Average length 7,261 yards. Architects the same there. Average scoring conditions, I generally tend to think of this as a little bit on the easier side. If we take a look at the tournament history just very quickly in Fantasy National, like 24 under, that would indicate easy. However, Dietrich did run away from the field last year, rest being 17 and 16 under. Whoops, wrong year. We have 21 under and 18s from Burns and Scotty. We have 19 under from Scotty, 16 under from Scotty, a little bit more average, a little bit further back, 19 under from Brooks. So I would classify this as easy. If the rabbit hole wants to label it as average, I'm not going to quarrel too much with that. Certainly not difficult is what we're talking about. Even though Torrey Pines played pretty darn easy this week, generally it plays very difficult. We're not looking at something like Torrey Pines. There are good scores to be had around TPC Scottsdale. Quite a few bunkers. Average amount it says per the rabbit hole, but 67 of them. The rabbit hole is saying 5 water danger holes, whereas as we saw with the GCSAA, they labeled 6. Large greens, mixed. But here's where it gets interesting. We've got average length rough on a driver heavy course. It is easy to gain strokes off the tee here. It is average in terms of approach, average in terms of around the green, and easy to putt around TPC Scottsdale. Average scoring conditions for the par 3s, 4s, and 5s. Putting is generally pretty darn easy, as you see all there. Scrambling, however, can be a little bit difficult with some of the water dangers. Sand saves aren't the easiest around here. Scrambling from short grass isn't easy around here. There is very low rough penalty, but it's an average missed fairway penalty because a lot of those shots will end up in the water. Instead of going through Fantasy Nationals course breakdown, I want to try to get, again, as I mentioned in the intro, I want to start trying to rely on the rabbit hole as they are going to be the main source of data moving forward. So I'm trying to get myself kind of used to the rabbit hole. If we take a look at the scorecard here in the rabbit hole, we see that there are a couple of holes here that will come up and be pretty darn challenging for these players. Most notably, the long par 4 11th plays to almost a quarter of a shot over par, almost 5% double bogey rate. So one of the water danger holes, just very, very difficult hole. And then you have the other long par 4 on the back at 490, playing to about a tenth of a shot over par. But there are a lot of good scoring opportunities around TPC Scottsdale, mostly in the par 5s. The lone par 5 on the front 9 plays to almost a half a shot under par with a 3.6 eagle rate. And then the 2 par 5s on the back, pretty darn easy as well. Half a shot under par, quarter of a shot under par. This is the one with water guarding the front, so a lot of players choose to lay up on this par 5. That's why you don't see as many eagles. Still a very good birdie opportunity. The drivable par 4 yields a decent amount of eagles, a little over 1% there. Plays to a quarter of a shot under par. Even the stadium hole plays under par. Short par 4 10th plays under par. So good scoring opportunities around TPC Scottsdale, especially in the par 5s. We look at some statistics here from the rabbit hole. Off the tee, green, meaning it's easier than the tour average. You can see to gain off the tee is quite a bit easier here around TPC Scottsdale than the average tour event, especially drives 320 plus yards. This place is generally pretty fast and firm. They want it that way to try and punish players for getting too aggressive, get some run out into the water danger and into the native area. But a lot of big drives here. Driver usage is much more. Distance is much more. Average distance is 292 essentially on the PGA Tour. And here it's about 304.5. So big difference. Slightly less good drive percentage. Then we move to approach. A lot of this is easier to hit greens. Easier to hit greens from the fairway bunkers. Average approach distance is much shorter thanks to the longer distance off the tee. But then we start coming into where the challenges of TPC Scottsdale present themselves. It's in the proximity because of these very long greens, these very large greens that are pretty firm and pretty darn fast. Overall proximity is, a decent bit further here. Good 2 feet further, 2.5 feet further. That's not nothing. Birdie or better percentage from the rough, much more difficult. Players go for the green more often here, but they are less successful than the average tour event. You can see that in those two metrics there. And then around the green, especially if players are playing from the short grass, like fairway cut or collar maybe, it's not easy around here. 6.5 feet is the average proximity, and here it's almost 8 feet. Scrambling percentage right at tour average. Proximity to the hole, just in general, sand, rough, or short grass, half a foot further away, not easy. Putting, not as easy around here, even though it said it was easy up here earlier. Stroke gain putting easy, but 3-putt avoidance is average. So if we took a look at that, you get a little bit of green in here. It's slight, but it is green. That's the scoring. There's the putting. Okay, Approach ranges. This is interesting. We always like to look at this in Fantasy National with the distribution chart. Forgetting the technical name of it, approach shot distribution chart or whatever. Here at TPC Scottsdale, the majority are from 100 to 150, which is combining two of the ranges that Fantasy National offered. The Rabbit Hole also has more than 200 plus. They have 200 to 225, 250 plus, etc. So the majority still come from 100 to 150, but it's a little bit less than the tour average. So we're looking at more so maybe like 150 to 175, thanks to a couple of those longer par fours and the par fives. You can see that the 225 to 250, all of these par fives are getting attacked in two for the most part. The only exception being the water protected 15th. Let's see what else here stands out. Strokes gained chart off the tee, easier. Approach, a little bit more difficult. Around the green, easier. Putting, slightly more difficult. Distance is much higher. Accuracy, a little bit lower. But I don't think too many players are terribly concerned with finding what little rough there is around TPC Scottsdale, so long as they're not finding the water and the native area. If we want to take a look at these past leaderboards just very quickly, take a look at these strokes gained. Like Thomas Dietrich just put the daylights out. I mean, that's going to win you a lot of tournaments if you're hitting irons very well and putting the daylights out. But you can see a lot of iron play here in the top 6 or so. We have one player negative and off the tee, but he's not really an off the tee type player. This is what Seabez does. A lot of around the green and a lot of putting. Will Chandler, top 10 last year, was atrocious off the tee, but made a whole lot of putts. So that's what it is. I mean, you're going to have to find the guys that are in good iron form. Interesting to note that, a lot of these players were pretty darn good around the green. So, maybe we want to look around the green type stuff with, maybe scrambling from short grass around the green. Short grass, proximity maybe, short grass. That seems to be a little bit difficult here. Rough, not so much. The sand, maybe not so much. So there's a look at the Rabbit Holes description of TPC Scottsdale. We'll go back to the player page view. And again, I've got this set just for January 1st of 2026, just in the immediacy. And no, the Farmers is not in here just yet. It'll probably be in here tomorrow. But in the field this week, your top off the tee players early so far in 2026 have been Keith Mitchell, Chris Goddard, Scotty, Siwoo, Rasmus Højgaard, Hao Tong Lee, Harris English, Michael Brennan, Kensei Harada, and Ben Griffin in the top 10 in terms of off the tee. We take a look at approach. Definitely going to be very important. Your top approach players early in 2026. Corey Connors, Siwoo, Austin Smotherman, JT Poston, Johnny Kiefer, Max McGreevy, Hao Tong Lee, Max Homa, Hideki, and Patrick Rogers. I'm going to skip around the green just for a second. Let's take a look at putting, but I'm going to bring in these comp courses, these courses that have the Poa Trivialis. So I'm going to expand the time frame. Let's go all the way back to 2022, January 1st, 2022, and we're going to take a look at Harbor Town, host of the RBC Heritage. We're going to take a look at Innisbrook, the Copperhead Resort, host of Valspar. Memorial Park, which is now the host of the Houston Open, Quail Hollow Club, Stadium Course, where we were for, I think it's called, oh no, it's Pete Dye. I got to get used to that. Pete Dye Stadium Course. TPC San Antonio, the Oaks course specifically, Sawgrass, and Scottsdale. So we're going to apply this. This is the courses, at least per the GCSAA, that list Poa Trivialis as the green surface type. In the field this week, going back to the beginning of 2022, just getting enough rounds in here. I mean, Scotty's got a bunch. Spieth. I mean, there's a lot of rounds in here, but I just want to make sure I get enough data in here. Your top putters on Poa Trivialis in the field this week for the Waste Management: Sam Burns, Christian Bezuidenhout, Seabez, Brian Harmon, Billy Horschel, Nico Echeverria, Ben Griffin, Jacob Bridgman, Mav McNeely, Chad Ramey, and Harry Hall are your top 10 in terms of putting on Poa Trivialis. Let's reset that. We'll take a look at a couple of different things here before we kind of wrap up for the evening, since we're not going as much into Fantasy National. I will take a look at some around the green. We're going to definitely look at around the green. Let's do around the green proximity short grass. And we're going to look at, let's bring it to beginning of 2025, just to kind of narrow this in a little bit. Your top proximity players on short grass around the green: Sudarshan Yelamaraju leads the way with, a few rounds, but he's been pretty good on short grass from the Amex and the Sony. He played the Canadian Open last year. S.T. Lee, Daniel Brown, Charlie Hoffman, Xander, Scotty, Hideki, Webb Simpson, Andrew Novak, and Wyndham Clark are your top 10 proximity short grass around the green players in the field this week. Something that we are definitely not going to want to ignore. Let's take a look at some par 5 efficiency. You're going to have to take advantage of these par 5s around TPC Scottsdale. We'll dig into this more tomorrow in the Data Dive show. Your top par 5 performers in terms of scoring, going back to the beginning of last year, that are in the field this week: Yelamaraju, who is really taking advantage of par 5s. He missed the cut at the American Express, but, averaged a 4.25, 4.5, 4.25. So he had a few eagles in there, because you see the birdie or better percentage isn't the best. He birdied birdied both par 5s at the Sony in round 3 and in round 1. So he's done pretty well with par 5s. Marty Doe, Zhe-Ching Doe, Pearson Cootie, S.H. Kim, Scotty, Michael Brennan, Austin Smotherman, Jake Knapp, ADDC, Adrian Dumont Deschessart, and Davis Chatfield are your top 10 in terms of par 5 performance going back to the beginning of last year. I'll definitely narrow that in throughout the week, but just, again, trying to get a quick look overview here. We did strokes gained. We can definitely look at off the tee, because distance is going to matter this week as well. We're going to take a look at distance, and this is pretty neat. You can filter by condition here. So what I kind of want to look at, just to kind of get our feet wet with the rabbit hole and all the things that are available to us. Let's take a look at driver-heavy golf courses, because this is driver-heavy. Most players will hit driver around TPC Scottsdale. So on driver-heavy courses, Let's apply that filter. Going back to the beginning of last year, your top distance players in the field this week for the Waste Management: Marco Pinge, Michael Brennan, Nikolai Højgaard, Aldrich Pagaiter, Minwoo Lee, Christo Lamprecht, Xander, Wyndham Clark, Rasmus Højgaard, and Chris Godera. You can see most of those players not exactly the highest in accuracy. So you could look at total driving, which is, as you can see there, it adds a player's ranking in terms of distance and accuracy. So you see, like Michael Brennan, second and first, he'll be first in total driving. If we wanted to take a look at that, total driving on driver-heavy golf courses, Michael Brennan, Thorbjornsen, Pearson Coody, Rico Hoey, Johnny Kiefer, William Mao, Kevin Roy, Keith Mitchell, Alex Smalley, Kevin Yu, and Scotty. Your top 11 due to ties. 320 plus. I don't know if we need to look at that just yet. Let's clear these filters. Oh, whoops. Let's clear these filters. We'll take a look at proximity just very quickly, and that might be the end of the show this evening. What was it that we saw from in terms of proximity? Ranges looks like 150 to 200, perhaps. Maybe a little bit of the 225 to 250 as well. So 150 to 200 and then 225. So 150 to 200, boom, look at that. Overall 150 to 200. If we sort on that, and yes, I'll go all the way back to the beginning of 2025 just to give people enough rounds. Your top performers in proximity, 150 to 200. Scotty, Austin Smotherman, Rico Hoey, Victor Hovland, Siwoo Kim, Charlie Hoffman, Xander, Matt McCarty, Matty Schmid, and Akshay Bhatia. And then 225 to 250, we might have to look at like fairway proximity, is that right? 225, that's fairway 200 plus. Can I not scroll over? Doesn't look like it. I'd like to be able to go to 225 to 250. I don't see it. Like I said, bear with me. Still learning the ins and outs of the rabbit hole here. Miscellaneous clubhead speed, pretty cool. Ball speed. Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably going to do it for the initial research show this evening. A lot of the reasons why I'm not doing much with Fantasy National, I really liked, especially in the initial research show, to kind of go through the tournament history, the strokes gained total, page view, see who the strokes gained total leaders were at various tournaments, just to get a feel for who has played them well. That page doesn't come up anymore, I don't think. Is it this? View multi-year field history. See, this is kind of what I want to look at, but it's not as clean. So, this is the Waste Management. Yeah. I don't know why these players are starred. I haven't been in here, but your strokes gained total leader is Scotty by a mile. 2 wins, another top 10 or a third, 7th in 2021. Like, it's just not easy to see, but Jordan Spieth played well here. Xander hadn't played here for 2 years, but runner-up, 3rd and a 10th. Nick Taylor won here 2 years ago. Sam Burns has been pretty good here. Brooks, a lot more historical success since he left for LIV, but winner in 2021, 3rd in 2022. Hideki is 5 for 5 in the past 5 years. Siwoo's 5 for 5 the past 5 years. Some other notables here. Wyndham Clark 4 for 5. Keith Mitchell 4 for 5. Brian Harmon 4 for 5. Kitayama's 3 for 3. So there's a look at some of the players who have been pretty good around TPC Scottsdale. Players who haven't been: Vince Whaley, Chad Ramey, Davis Riley. See, like this, I'm used to Red being cut, and he actually made the cut, but it's just signifying that he was less than, or he was, under field average in terms of strokes gained total. So that's why it's kind of throwing me off here. Austin Eckroat hasn't been very good. Nico is 0 for 2. Thor Bjornsson struggled here last year, but it's only one time. JJ Spawn has not been very good here. 0 for 2 and a withdrawal. Chris Goddard 0 for 2. Woodland, former winner way back, I think in 2019, maybe 2020. Has not fared well lately. Adam Shank, been better in the last 3 years. Patton Gazire 0 for 3 in his past 3 years. So there's a look at some of the players who have not been good around TPC Scottsdale. And then if we want to take a look at the tournament, like the historic conditions, lots of easy. You did have a difficult round in 2023 when the wind really picked up. That's very rare. Most of the time it was average, easy to average. So green speeds, average. See, Fantasy National traditionally labeled these fast, not average. So there's a look at some various starting points to consider this week as we move forward, thinking about TPC Scottsdale in the field and who we might want to focus on. Again, tomorrow night I'll go deeper into the statistics around TPC Scottsdale, figure out, in these par 3s, these par 4s, these par 5s, where these strokes gained are coming from. And, of course, we'll take a look at the early look file, and I'll show you some of the research that I will have posted tomorrow. So there's a quick look at the early look file, if you will. But that's going to do it for an initial research show this evening. Thanks to everyone who tunes in, watches, listens, supports the channel by liking the videos, commenting, and subscribing. I always appreciate it. I love what I do, taking a very in-depth look at golf statistics, giving you a statistician and data analyst view of what he sees, trying to help us all win a little bit of money in the process. The American Express was fairly solid with the placement hit on Andrew Putnam, and we crashed back down to earth at the Farmers. So we're going to try and put ourselves back on the right foot for the waste management. So thanks again for tuning in and all the support for all the wagers you made this past week for the Farmers, for all the DFS contests you played this past week for the Farmers, and until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive Show, may all your bets be profitable.